This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Flugner now to try to send this game further. Did he miss it? He did! Michigan wins in overtime!
Taking you all the way back to January 1st, 2000. We all had just survived Y2K, and we turned our attention to the Orange Bowl. Two of the best programs in college football squared off in Miami, Michigan, and Alabama in an epic Orange Bowl that one that I remember, well, not fondly, but remember vividly for what had happened, and we're going to go through all that today on Distant Replay. I am Ben George. He is Mike Noto. Glad to have you on the podcast. As always, you can find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Mike, I'm looking forward to this game because I'm sure you have a lot of questions about Alabama football, because for people that are just discovering Alabama or really have tuned into Alabama since the Nick Saban dynasty started, forgot a lot about what happened between the years of like 98 to 2006.
I definitely fall in that category. I mean, I'm aware of who the coach was at this time, who some of the major players were, but just sort of filling in the gaps of sort of how we led into the rise under Nick Saban. Definitely going to be looking to you for some insight on that.
Yeah, this is my wheelhouse. I mean, this is the time I was finishing up high school, going off to college. So, I'm very familiar with the players. Actually went to high school with one of the players in this game, which we'll go into with as we go through the rosters in this game. But yeah, this is my experience of Alabama football in a nutshell. And this was actually maybe a little bit better because Alabama was actually good. This is a time, Mike, when Alabama would go on like a run where they'd, after Gene Stallings, it'd be like every 3 years or 4 years they have a really good team, and then like a disaster of a season afterwards.
Gotcha. So you're just like every other program pretty much.
We were back then, yeah.
you know what I mean? You're going through a great period right now, but
right.
I mean, you just described outside of the top 4 or 5 programs in the nation, you just described pretty much what happens to everyone.
Yeah. But just a reminder that Alabama football is not even, it's always been really good and it's a historic program, but what Nick Saban's doing is just not common at all for anybody. So let's talk about this game a little bit, Mike. So this is, you might not remember, along with the Alabama side of this, the other part of the equation is Tom Brady. And did you remember when I told you this game, hey, 2000 Orange Bowl, did you remember Tom Brady being involved in this game?
I did remember it only because there's been so many documentaries over the years about Brady's career. And this is sort of what they use as the jump off point to him becoming a pro and him showing some very small signs in this game of maybe what was to come. I mean, not completely, but just some of the traits as far as the intangible parts of being a quarterback are outlined based on his performance in this game. So I knew he was in the game. I knew about, you obviously, if you follow college football back then, the Tom Brady, Drew Henson quarterback controversy was a big thing because we're at a time where Michigan is a top flight program under Lloyd Carr.
Yeah, it's interesting because, obviously I was watching this game, and this was a game that I was very highly invested in, and this season was an incredible season for Alabama. But if you had asked me, maybe 5 years after this game, even before Tom Brady really exploded and become what he is now, who was the quarterback in Michigan that beat Alabama in the Orange Bowl? And I probably wouldn't be able to answer. I mean, he was at the time seemingly just another nondescript, slow Big Ten quarterback.
Yeah, you know what you thought? You thought, okay, we had the Brian Griese years where they won the national championship, right? Mm-hmm. And then at the time, this is what you thought. You had Brian Griese, and now you had the big recruit in Drew Henson coming in, and Tom Brady was sort of a way station between those two.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, that's about right. And we know the draft and the pictures of him, at the combine and all that stuff. But in this game, he was really good. But he was surrounded by some pretty good players. And as we talk about these two teams, just a reminder where we are on the BCS in this year. This is year 2 of the BCS. These Michigan and Alabama team were both very good. The final standings heading into the bowl season, Alabama was 4, Michigan was 8. So these were 2 of the top 10 programs. I mean, these were 2 really good teams all season long. But when you look at Michigan alongside Tom Brady, I mean, he probably didn't get the headlines, Mike. It was probably Anthony Thomas, the running back, and David Terrell were probably more the attention grabbers.
Coming into this game, There are 4 or 5 names from this Michigan team that are bigger names than Tom Brady. I mean, we know what Tom Brady's become, obviously, but heading into this game, I mean, you mentioned David Terrell, you mentioned Anthony Thomas, Steve Hutchinson, Dhani Jones, Ian Gold. These are all guys that were really, really good college players. And this is at a time where Michigan is attracting like top-level talent.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And David Terrell, man, he's a guy that just, I think just kind of lives in the crawl of Alabama. Like what he did in this game as we go through it. There are 2 names that I think Alabama fans, 3 names as we go through this. Terrell, but Milo Lewis, because, you'll hear a lot of Alabama fans say, you're not aware of Milo's restaurant, I don't think, but it's an Alabama burger joint. It's kind of like a regional burger joint, like In-N-Out would be on the West Coast, or like Steak and Shake would be, on the East Coast or whatever. Milo's like a burger joint in Alabama in the Southeast. But everybody would be like, yeah, Terrell ate at Milo's, all Orange Bowl. Like that's kind of what they would say. Like the matchup there was just a nightmare for Alabama fans when it all played out. But Terrell was really good, and obviously the star of this game indeed. So that's Michigan. Alabama. Let's go to this Alabama roster, Mike. I like this. Okay, we start with the quarterback controversy. I don't know that you even knew the quarterback controversy existed in the Alabama locker room, but you had Andrew Zhao. Well, I think most college fans, just general college fans, remember Andrew Zhao, but I don't know how much people will remember Tyler Watts. But these guys were basically 1A, 1B.
So Andrew Zhao, you remember him because his last name started with a Z, right? I mean, you're not going to forget a guy like that. And he was a decent player, but I was not aware of the Andrew Zhao, Tyler Watts quarterback controversy. And I can't think of anything more SEC than a really contentious quarterback controversy battle between the fans with 2 average cute quarterbacks being involved. No one knows about the Andrew Zhao, Tyler Watts quarterback controversy unless you're an Alabama fan. I hate to break the news to you.
That's what's so remarkable about it. And look, both guys, I respect both guys, right? I mean, you have to, and they both had pretty good careers. But Tyler Watts was a true freshman this season, and he had a really good high school career, Mike, a pretty big school right outside of Birmingham, and the highest level, 6A, and had a really good career. And he came in as kind of the
Hoover. Did he go to Hoover?
No, it was Pelham. Yeah, not too far from Hoover. I would have mentioned Hoover if it was Hoover. Everybody knows two-a-days. But yeah, I mean, so he came in as a lot of hype, and is he going to be that next generational quarterback? That was kind of the thought. But he kind of became more of a decent passer, but more of a runner. But not remarkable, really. But he had a solid career. But he came in so the debate was, hey, Andrew Zhao, a guy that's he was the starter the previous year, had a pretty good year. He's pretty good, but he's not consistent, and you saw that in the game. His numbers weren't bad this year, but he threw for less than 2,000 yards, which also not a surprise because Alabama's offense at this time is a very run-heavy offense, very pro offense. It's not anything close to what it looks like today. I mean, the last 10 years we've broken every single wide receiver reception record because the guys that were playing back then. But this was a debate, and it was something that everybody talked about week in, week out. Should Tyler Watts get more time? Andrew Zhao, is he the guy? And then as you saw in this game, Mike DuBose used both guys, which going back and watching in retrospect was even more frustrating.
So I have to ask, which side were you on back in not now with the benefit of hindsight, but young Ben, 2000, the year 2000, leading into this game. What side were you on? I was on the Andrew Zhao side, I think, that year.
I just think he was a better overall quarterback and could do more in the passing game. Now, maybe that didn't need to be the focus because you had Shaun Alexander running back. I mean, you had a couple of decent receivers there, but it wasn't what you see now. I mean, I'm not going to take anything away from Freddie Millins because I love Freddie Millins, but you had Shaun Alexander, a legit Heisman candidate in the backfield, so you didn't really need to do that much. But yeah, I'm probably on the Zhao side, but it was definitely a heated controversy that season. And Zhao, because look, Zhao, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions that year. Now Tyler Watts, 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions that year. So you might not, from the outside, you probably don't think there should have been much of a debate, Mike, but there was consistently between those couple of guys. But eventually Zhao was the starter in this game, and throughout the season he just didn't play every single series in every game, as we saw here. But Shaun Alexander was behind him, and this was Shaun Alexander is an Alabama legend, Mike, as you would imagine, but mainly because you had a number of guys in the 90s that were good, but he was kind of that first, and there weren't a ton of skill guys necessarily. Alabama would have a really good running back. They had some really good ones, but like an upper elite, top 5, going to be a first round pick, could be a Heisman candidate. Those guys didn't come around a whole lot. Remember, Alabama had never won a Heisman before Nick Saban got there. So him being in that conversation made him an even more special player.
Yeah, Shaun Alexander. I mean, if you're of a certain age and you've been playing fantasy football for a long time, like I have for like the past 20 years, Shaun Alexander holds a special place in your heart. He was one of the first like elite running backs that everyone wanted when he eventually became a pro and played for the Seahawks. And he was great in this game. He's a name you remember from college. He's been on everyone's radar for a really long time. And the way I look at Alabama, most of their skill position players, like you mentioned of note, have come in the Saban era. I think he's better than every running back Alabama's had that I've seen, except for Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I'm thinking through it, but I can't necessarily argue that. Obviously Ingram was a Heisman Trophy winner, so you have to put him there. But yeah, this guy, what Shaun Alexander did his career was remarkable, and he had some really good years. He was highlighted by his freshman season. He was kind of in the doghouse under Stallings when he started his career, didn't get to play a whole lot, but he got to play against LSU. I'm pretty sure in Baton Rouge, ran for almost 300 yards as a true freshman in one of his first real opportunities. From that point forward, he became this like legend, and then ended up capping his career off. He got injured. I think he sat out, missed a game or two with an injury in the season, so that kind of cost him. He ended up finishing 7th in the Heisman race. I think a lot of Alabama fans thought he could have finished higher. He almost had 20 touchdowns. Ron Dane won it that year. Ron Dane obviously had a really good year. Do you remember who finished second that year, Mike? I'll give you 3 guesses, okay? Who finished second in the Heisman that year? Assuming you don't have it pulled up.
Wanky?
No.
Peter Warwick?
He finished 6th.
I don't even have another guess because I know Florida State was really good.
I thought you would have guessed Michael Vick. Vick finished 3rd that year. Joe Hamilton.
Oh, God. Yeah. So the best thing about Joe Hamilton was Joey Hamilton was a good quarterback at Georgia Tech. And the best thing is Calvin Johnson came shortly thereafter, didn't he? And then he had a horrible quarterback. Remember Reggie Ball?
Yeah.
And I remember Georgia Tech fans be like, man, if we only had Joey Hamilton and Calvin Johnson, it'd be the best team ever.
Yeah, you don't think of a Georgia
Hamilton.
Tech quarterback throwing for 3,000 yards and almost 30 touchdowns. But Joe Hamilton that year was second in the Heisman race. But beyond that, Alabama, their defense was probably let's stay on offense real quick. Freddie Millens, electric player. He was a dynamic playmaker throughout the year, had some huge highlight reel plays, great returning guy. We saw that in this game. He was remarkable. That was probably the other big name. Did you recognize anybody else in that offense just as a casual fan?
Oh, Chris Samuels,
yeah,
of
Chris
course.
Samuels.
He didn't play in this game, but he was, probably the best pro prospect, right, on Alabama this year. If we're talking strictly pro prospect.
He was an Outland winner, which, again, this was back in an era when Alabama wouldn't win a lot of awards. Alabama football, Mike, for the longest time was about grit, homegrown players, played tough, they wanted to represent the Crimson Tide. They'd have some big recruits out of other states, but for the most part, you're relying on guys kind of from your backyard to rise up. And so you didn't have a lot of these guys that were on the national radar all the time. So Chris Samuels was one of those.
So Freddie Millens, you mentioned him. So I have in my notes, I have Freddie Millens, and I have ask Ben about him because I bet he loved him.
Yeah, Freddie was great. Freddie had a couple of huge plays throughout the season. Most notably, if you saw the '99 SEC championship game, he had a great run, which he outran the Florida defense and was kind of the start of that blowout win over Jesse Palmer, your boy, Florida Gators, in that championship game, and kind of propelled him into this spot. But yeah, he was a guy that you just got excited about every time you saw him touch the football. And he was from Starkville, which is Mississippi State's. I don't know how Mississippi State loses a guy out of their own backyard like that, but he's a guy that came from Starkville, so kind of had that extra added rivalry element to it. But yeah, he was electric.
So Freddie Millens reminded me of like a Santana Moss type.
Yeah.
Like a Santana Moss light, you know what I mean? Like he probably wasn't as fast as Santana Moss, wasn't really a receiver, but that kind of player. Like when he had the ball in his hands, watch out.
Right. That's probably a pretty fair comparison. But yeah, he was a fun guy to watch. He was just a sophomore at this time too, so kind of a breakout player, and I think everybody expected him to be a Heisman candidate by the time he left, but never really got to that level. much of because of what happened at Alabama, with the coaching changes we'll get into. So you had that, and on the defensive side of the ball too, Mike, was another really. This is kind of where I knew a lot of these guys because this defense is really good. I think they were top 10 country in scoring and total defense, and because they had just a really good front seven. But the guy went to school with, Saleem Rasheed. Do you remember Saleem Rasheed at all?
I did not remember him at all, but I have in my notes that he was a freshman starter at Alabama, and he played good in this game. So what ended up happening with him?
He got drafted by the 49ers. He played in the NFL for a number of years. Didn't have a huge career, but what was crazy about the time is, he played at Shades Valley. That's where I went to school. Guy was, obviously a next level. His older brother played at Duke. Was Mr. Football in Alabama. So the family obviously had the genetics, but he was a great linebacker. But what was so remarkable is when he got down there, he was one of the first true freshmen to start his first game. We see it all the time now across college football, not just Alabama, but everywhere. I mean, guys come in and they're ready to play day one, but it was a very rare situation for him to get that start, and he rose to the occasion. He became one of the top players in that defense and was just dynamic.
So what was your high school again? What was it?
Shades Valley, right outside, kind of in Birmingham suburbs, yeah. Shades
Valley High.
The Mounties.
Gotcha.
The Mounties. What do you know about the Mounties?
I know it sounds a lot like Sweet Valley High.
Yeah, we're not. Nah, it's not the same thing.
It's not, no.
But yeah, so that defense also was really good. Milo Lewis, I mentioned, on that team. Not that excited about him. This was they had some pretty good. Marcus Spencer's a pretty good safety, and they had some pretty good players back there. But you're mostly looking at that front, the defensive line for Alabama, and then the linebackers. This defense was solid, which was even more remarkable what Tom Brady and that offense was able to do to this defense, because they throughout the year were able to limit teams pretty well, and they came in this game on quite a ride on defense. So let's let's go through the schedule a little bit too, Mike, to kind of set you up to where we are going into this game. We got Michigan first up, the Wolverines this season. Lloyd Carr, your boy Lloyd Carr's in his 5th season, has a pretty good year. Beat Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Purdue, all ranked teams, but then lost to Michigan State and then lost to Illinois. It was an unranked team, but they did beat Ohio State this year. Back when Ohio State not quite as good as they are now. They had a pretty good year. I mean, they beat 4 ranked teams heading in the Orange Bowl.
Yeah, these two teams, keep in mind, they played the toughest schedules in the nation heading into this game.
Yeah.
So both these teams played very good schedules. I'm a little surprised to hear Lloyd Carr had only been the head coach for 5 years as of this point. He's one of those guys who seems like he was there forever. And remember, this is at a time where, Michigan has the upper hand against Ohio State. This is the Lloyd Carr, John Cooper era, isn't it? We're right before. Are we into Tressel yet?
No, we're
not.
not.
I don't think we are.
No,
we're right before Tressel. Yeah.
Yeah. You had Backus on that team too, another really good offensive lineman from Michigan. And then Alabama, this was kind of the story of their season, Mike. They played you mentioned, a really tough schedule. The 3rd week of the season, I was at this game, Legion Field. They lost to Louisiana Tech. 3rd week of the season, 29-28. This was a game that, I'll test your knowledge. Do you remember who the do you remember any Louisiana Tech quarterbacks?
I know the one you're talking about.
Who?
Tim Rattay?
Yeah, exactly.
Tim Rattay, baby. Come on. At Louisiana Tech, he's like the guy.
I was going to say.
Karl Malone for basketball and Tim Rattay. And they had a good receiver, too. Who was the good receiver?
Bobby Ray Tell was a running back who was really good. There was Cangelosi.
No, hold on. Louisiana may not have been
time?
Here.
Okay. James Jordan. That's all I got. I'm looking at the box score from the Alabama game. Those were the guys. They probably had another guy that wasn't that didn't play this season potentially, but yeah, at this point, Alabama lost in that game. Rattay threw 50 times for 368 yards and 3 touchdowns.
I'm thinking Troy Edwards.
Okay, yeah.
Remember Troy Edwards? He graduated just before that, it looks like.
Okay, yeah, there you go. But they won that game, last second touchdown, and at that point, it seemed like the season was derailed. Alabama bounced back. They beat Arkansas, who was ranked, went down to Florida, beat Florida in Gainesville, which was a huge game at the time. Florida's number 3. Won at Ole Miss, who was ranked. So they won 3 ranked games in a row before losing to Tennessee, who was 5th, then beat Southern Miss, who was ranked. They played 5 straight ranked games. Also beat Mississippi State, Florida, both top 10 teams down the stretch, along with Auburn. So this team was really really, really good. And it's why they kind of hold a spot in my heart and a lot of Alabama fans' heart, because they were an SEC championship team 4 or 5 years after the previous one had won. It's kind of a bit of a drought a little bit in Tuscaloosa, but this team was had that special quality, could have competed for a BCS championship, but that slip up against Louisiana Tech pretty much set them off course. But really good year going into this. But they were coached by Mike DuBose. You remember Mike DuBose?
I remember Mike DuBose, and all right, so what is the deal with Mike DuBose? So he has a normal coaching. He plays at Alabama, right?
Right. One of Bears guys.
Sounds like one of Bears guys too when you hear him talking this game. He becomes, he's an assistant. He's a high school coach. Then he goes to Chattanooga, Southern Miss. Then he goes to the Alabama defensive line coach. Then to the Buccaneers for a little bit in the pros. Then he comes back to Alabama as an assistant, becomes the head coach from 97 to 2000. And from there, he's never coached at Division I again. The only Power 5 school he's ever coached at is Alabama.
Yeah. He's an Alabama guy. He's a Bama boy, Mike. I mean, that's basically what it is. This guy loves the university, and he was a great position coach. And he's the guy that Alabama basically decided, hey, we've got to change the way we look for coaches, right? Because for so many years it was, we got to find a guy that played under Bear, coached under Bear, that's in that tree, right? You got to find a guy that fits that mold. Somebody's got to know, he's got to understand what Alabama football is about, Mike. Has to know the tradition, has to know the inner workings in Tuscaloosa. So Mike DuBose kind of fit that, right? He had success as a defensive coach, was born and bred in Alabama, played on national championship team in the 70s. Everything you'd want from a coach, but the experience. I mean, that was the problem. That was his first head coaching job at Alabama, and
yeah, it was. You're right. It's his first head coaching job. Now, he's from Opp, Alabama.
Yep. You down with
and
OBP?
He's currently serving as the defensive coordinator there.
Yeah, so he had a bit of a falling out. I mean,
sorry, after getting elevated from being linebacker coach, he's now the defensive coordinator at Opp High School.
Yeah. I mean, look, listen, trying to get me to laugh here on the podcast, but seriously, do you remember why he left Alabama?
I know there was some sort of controversy, but was it that bad that if he wanted to, he could probably be coaching at a legitimate Division I school, couldn't he?
I don't know, Mike. I mean, he wasn't a bad coach, but I mean, maybe a lower level if he really wanted to.
Oh, I'm not talking head coach. I'm talking like a position coach or a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think that would have been fair. But I mean, listen, look, we're talking. It was a huge scandal. The Albert Means paying $200,000, whatever it was the allegation. It was what got Alabama on probation for a number of years, and the NCAA said that Alabama was staring down the barrel of a gun, and we're lucky that they didn't get the death penalty or whatever. So I mean, it was a huge scandal, and he was part of it behind that, but he also had some issues, some sexual discrimination lawsuit that came against him, sexual harassment lawsuit from his former secretary. So he had a lot of stuff happening kind of at the same time, and it obviously led to his demise. And this one season couldn't save him. Plus the 2000 season he went into it, Alabama was like third in the country preseason, like all the hype. I even went out to the Rose Bowl for the Alabama UCLA game to kick off that season. That's how hype we were for that year. We ended up losing to UCLA. I think Millens returned the opening punt for a touchdown, and then Alabama got blown out the rest of the way. And then the season fell apart from that point forward. But DuBose eventually resigned, and that's when Alabama started the coaching carousel. So, look, Mike DuBose was good, and then he left and didn't – he was out of it because of the NCAA for a while. Then he came back, and I think he was at Memphis for a brief second, and then got a head coaching job in high school, and then I think he's just been happy with just coaching football and being out of the limelight. Because I don't think he was ever a limelight guy. But the one thing that I remember about him, and everybody kind of remembers about him as an Alabama fan, he'd always clap his hands, right? And anytime there was something bad happening, like, Coach, why aren't you upset? Like Nick Saban, if something bad happens, he's not supporting his team and saying, hey, we'll get him next time. That and everything that was like a bad moment, he'd say, it's a challenge, but it's an opportunity. That's what he'd always say too. And it would just frustrate the hell out of you. So
and then that Alabama accent too.
yeah,
because I heard him speak at halftime of this game, so he's got that. It's an opportunity or whatever. Yeah.
Oh man, so yeah, that was quite the run for DuBose. But even he won 10 games at Alabama, Mike. So I mean, just about any coach that coaches there wins a championship or wins an SEC or wins 10 games there at Alabama. So that's Mike DuBose. So the Mike DuBose era after Gene Stallings was a dark time for Alabama fans. But there was light at the end of the tunnel eventually. All right, so where else we want to go with this game, Mike, before we hop into it?
I think we're good, man. We can head right into the game.
Okay, we had more Alabama talk than probably anybody wanted to hear, but this is the really the epicenter of my Alabama fandom growing up was all came together, converged in this 1999 season. So that's why I'm pretty passionate about it. So this game aired on ABC Sports. Brad Nessler, we love Brad Nessler, and Bob Greasy, great team.
Brad Nessler, if you listen to this podcast, we like him a lot. Bob Greasy, I thought he was great in college football. Bob Greasy, and then Lynn Swann on the sideline. So this is like a classic early 2000s team. I don't think this was like the number one team, but it was a solid, number two team.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, I guess it was number, I don't know if it was number two
Musburger.
or not.
Yeah, it was Musburger and Fouts,
still
I think,
around
was
at the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Strong number two, working this January 1st Orange Bowl. This was, by the way, Pro Player Stadium. And before the renovations, they became Hard Rock. This stadium, you could tell how outdated it was. I didn't realize, and I'm trying to envision Hard Rock now, but it seemed like these stands were so far back from the field and the sidelines. Like it seemed like they had about 20 yards of space on each sideline, and then the end zones were just like a wall. Like there wasn't fans directly on the field. It's kind of a wall and then elevated seating. Very outdated stadium.
Yeah, is this where the Marlins played?
No, this is where the Dolphins played.
Oh, okay.
But it's
I didn't know
just
this
like
is where the Marlins played also, because that might explain the stance. But yeah, these Miami stadiums over the years, outside of the Orange Bowl, which had charm but was still not that great of a stadium, the Miami sporting facilities haven't been that great over the years. Obviously, the new one for the Dolphins is awesome.
Yeah.
But the rest of their sports stadiums usually leave a little bit to be desired.
And I should correct myself. You are right. The Marlins did play there for a lot of their early years until 2011 when they opened the new stadium. So that was probably part of it. And I guess once they moved, they've renovated it and moved everything kind of closer to the field and whatnot. But definitely an interesting looking back on that game, kind of how that place was set up. So ABC, January 1st, 2000. So we'll go through this game. This game was really a slow starter, and probably not a surprise because both teams good defensively, Alabama especially, and these two teams had gone through the fire all season, so you knew they were ready for a battle, and just two programs that kind of everybody wanted to see play. But there wasn't a whole lot in this first quarter for me, Mike. I think a couple things that I noticed. One that you didn't notice, I'm sure. The headshot for my boy Salim Rasheed was wrong when they did the starting lineups. Completely botched that. I think they had one of the wide receivers in there as his headshot. So I know you didn't pick up on that, but I did. Freddie Millins, big punt return guy. They talked about it all the time, and you kind of saw that from the jump. I mean, every time he touched the ball, you could kind of see that he had that skill to maybe break it.
Yeah, you saw he jumped out, and he jumped out, and he was one of those guys the announcers were sort of ready for him to break a big play. And, definitely a storyline throughout the game.
And you want to know why the Andrew Zal controversy continued through his career? The first play Alabama had, I guess Jason McCaffrey, wide receiver for Alabama, got past, I think it was broken coverage. Guy was, I think, a quick slant and go, and he was wide open. I mean, nobody near him. One of those where like a quarterback just kind of, you don't have to throw it hard. You don't have to be perfect. Just get it out there, give it some time, let the guy run under it, and it's gone. And then Zal overthrew him by like 5 yards. I mean, a wide open guy. That was quintessentially the reason why there was such a debate on whether or not Andrew Zal should be starting over Tyler Watts.
Yeah, these quarterbacks that are not consistent drive you crazy, especially when they have experience, and that leads to let's see what the young guy can do in Watts, right? So I get all the kidding aside from before talking about that quarterback controversy. I could definitely see why it was a thing and why some Alabama fans probably wanted to see, hey, let's just see what Watts can do if he's given a chance.
I mean, he threw some nice balls. He had a great D ball and made some great passes throughout the year. But it's just like you'd have these, and there's just they're head scratchers. Like how do you completely miss a throw like that at that level? But scoreless first quarter, not a lot to really talk about in that first quarter at all. Both teams kind of filling each other out. We know Tom Brady. He's a late game quarterback. We've seen him get off the slow start, so no surprise there. But as we go to the second quarter, how much did you love it when Joe Willie Namath appeared in the booth?
Yeah, look, you have Joe Willie Namath and Bob Greasy in the booth. That's a lot of experience, some Super Bowl titles, 2 Hall of Famers. It was cool seeing them interact. And I love Joe Willie, you know that.
Your dad cherishes Joe Willie too. He's a legend. I love.
Have we said on here what I did when I went to Alabama for the first time?
I don't think so.
Okay, so they have something like it's not a Walk of Fame, but
yeah, Walk of Champions.
What's it called?
Walk of Champions.
Walk of Champions. And Joe Willie has a little plaque there, and I got down and I kissed it. I'm not ashamed of it.
Yeah, all the captain. Every permanent captain gets voted on in the year. They come back and they put their handprint and footprints down at Denny Chimes at the quad, and yeah, Joe Willie was there, and Mike had to go. I think it was like, hey Mike, I got to at least bring you by here and let you see Joe Willie, and I think he did take a picture down on the ground. What a memory. But yeah, so Joe Willie makes an appearance in this game. Gotta always love it when he shows up around Alabama. First scoring, Alabama gets off. I mean, it was really the Shaun Alexander show for Alabama. I mean, throughout this game. He has a couple of big runs, but Alabama jumps out to a 14-0 lead in this game, kind of midway through the second quarter. And really, I mean, they were fourth in the BCS, on the cusp of a national championship this year. They look like, okay, maybe this team is going to pull away. They had just blown out Florida, had been playing really good football coming in. You kind of got the feeling like, okay, Alabama's on the verge, a couple more plays like this. If Michigan doesn't get it going, Alabama might cruise to a victory here.
Yeah, this second quarter was all Alabama until late, right? I mean, you got, if you're an Alabama fan, you got good Freddie Millen's punt return. You got 2 Shaun Alexander touchdown runs. You got Joe Willie in the booth. You got everything going for you right now. And Alabama, like you said, takes a 14-0 lead with 2 Alexander touchdown runs.
And this is when we start seeing Tyler Watts get some snaps too. 4 minutes left in the half. He's getting some snaps. Alabama's got a really good chance here to not put the game away, but really distance itself from Michigan. They get a big play that gets called back for holding from the 25 back to their own 4, and they end up punting from their end zone. Then you get a halo penalty. I forgot about the halo. I guess it was called the halo rule, where you couldn't be within 2 yards of a punt returner. So they got that penalty, and then Michigan all of a sudden has the ball at Bama's 45 with a chance to score.
Yeah, I thought this was I don't know what your feelings are, but I thought this was a pretty big point in the game here where, like you said, it looked like Alabama may run away with it, and you have this late in the half drive by Michigan, and this would become a major theme throughout the game, as you hinted at before. Brady to Terrell for a touchdown with 58 seconds left, and we go into halftime with Alabama leading 14-7. Of note, like we said before, Alexander has 84 yards and 2 touchdowns in the first half.
Yeah, 15 carries, 84, and 2 touches. It was funny because I knew going back to this game like what David Terrell did to Alabama. It's criminal, right? But it was funny because like literally the play before he has his first catch. I mean, I don't even know if it was his first catch, but that touchdown play, I think Greasy says he's basically, or Nessler, he's been a non-entity for Michigan so far in this game. We're late first half, and he really hasn't made a play yet. And then from that point forward, it was like, okay, this guy's an All-American. He makes the catch there, 14-7, and that's kind of when the floodgates open. But the other thing I noticed, too, in the second quarter, there's an air horn in the stands. Did you hear that? Like somebody's firing away at the air horn.
Yeah, it was annoying. Do they even let you bring air horns into games anymore?
I didn't even. I don't remember them letting you at that point, honestly.
Yeah, someone smuggled in an air horn, and it was really annoying. You're right.
One other thing I saw on the sidelines, I don't know if you noticed it, I think it was after an Alabama drive, and they shoot the bench, maybe after a touchdown. Did you notice who one of the assistants was on the sideline for Alabama?
I didn't. Who is it?
Dabo Sweeney was the.
Dabo. So when did he?
He's a wide receivers coach for Alabama at this point.
When did he play for Alabama? In the 80s?
Beginning of the 90s, 90 to 92.
Oh, wow. So he's pretty young. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as he finished, he became a GA at Alabama and worked his way up. until he eventually moved over to Clemson as a wide receiver coach. But yeah, this was Dabo's 7th year GA all the way to this point, 7 straight years. But he had worked his way up to wide receiver, so he was still very unknown at that point. But yeah, on the sideline for this game, coaching under Mike DuBose. Who would have known? Who would have known Sweeney was from the DuBose coaching tree, right?
I was just going to say, so do we ever talk about the Mike DuBose coaching tree? Is that going to be a segment on College Game Day one day?
I don't think he gets the credit he deserves, Mike, to be honest with you.
Just one branch. It's just Dabo Sweeney.
It's a short tree.
Yeah.
Oh, man. So third quarter, again, 14-7.5. Alabama avoids disaster early in this quarter. A pitch to Alexander. Kind of a high pitch, but he probably should have caught it. But it goes in the backfield. It's going 10 or 15 yards back. Michigan has every chance to recover, but it's one of those those reels where you watch where like the music's going dun 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 dun.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Every guy's jumping on the football. Eventually goes out of bounds, and Alabama avoids it, but can't do much with it. Same thing happens with Michigan too. Very, very early in that drive, they fumble it, and it goes out of bounds as well. And again, I think this is kind of a turning point too. Michigan. Alabama's defense is kind of right on Brady. They can't quite get to him. He has a huge sack that he avoids and escapes out of. We know the ability of Brady to scramble, right? But he gets out of it, gets an incompletion out of it instead of losing about 15 yards. And then a play or two later hits David Terrell, who again beats Milo Lewis and takes it to the house, 57 yards. And you mentioned that first half, kind of late first half turn of events. I thought that was a big sequence too.
Yeah, and this Brady to Terrell connection, both at the end of the first half and this one here, right at the beginning of the third quarter, it looks very easy. Can't stress enough. Like these aren't like tough catches he's making. He just looks like he's a notch above everyone else that's trying to cover him. 57 yards, 14-14, and to this point, it's David Terrell 2 touchdowns and Alexander 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, these two guys were the headliners, man, no doubt. Bama comes back, another great run by Shaun Alexander, 50-yard TD run, which he was a very unique runner because like he had the kind of the broad shoulders, but he kept his pad level really low and had really good balance for a guy his size. You kind of saw it here. He was able to break a couple of tackles, bounce off a couple of guys, and then you saw his speed. He was able to outrun them to the end zone. Just a beautiful run. Yeah,
look, he was the kind of guy where his speed took you by surprise. Because, again, he's one of those guys who always wore the big pads, and when he needed to turn up the jets, you very rarely remember someone catching him from behind. They mentioned in this broadcast this was his 8th 100-yard game of the season, and he's over 130 yards for the game up to this point.
Yeah, having a tremendous season indeed, and a great game here. And Alabama up 21-14. Again, feeling good, kind of weathered the Michigan run here to tie it up, and then they get a stop. Freddie Millens answers with another huge punt return. This time takes it to the house, 62 yards. Gives Bama a 28-14 lead. Now we're midway through the third. We're not even midway through the third. Ton of scoring in this quarter. But again, Alabama up 2 scores, and you kind of think, okay, it seems, I know Michigan's had a couple of big plays here, but it just still feels like Alabama's got a few more home run threats here, and we've seen that early.
Yeah, Alabama's got all the momentum to this point. 28-14, about 5 minutes left in the third quarter. As an Alabama coach, you have to be thinking right now, the only way Michigan's going to beat us is if we let Terrell beat us. Like, that's literally the only thing that's worked for Michigan the whole game.
You would think.
They're not running the ball that good, but nevertheless, the next possession for Michigan is Brady to Terrell again for the third time to make it 28-21 Alabama. At this point, Terrell has 8 receptions on 10 targets for 140 yards and 3 touchdowns. And remember, this was a guy who Brad Nessler at the end of the second quarter was saying he was non-existent. Yeah. So he pretty much did all of this in a little bit over a quarter.
Maybe not even over a quarter, probably less than a quarter.
Yeah, you're right. Honestly, probably, yeah.
Because there's still about 5.5 minutes left in this quarter after we've seen both teams just scoring at will, essentially, 14-14 in this quarter itself. But it's 28-21, and I thought that was a really good drive, too, by Michigan in that one. And that was kind of like Tom Brady. I mean, he never – like, you watch him now and you kind of see his highlights. He doesn't really blow you away many times with the way he operates. But when you kind of just – it's one of those situations where he makes it look so easy that it seems like he's not doing anything extraordinary. But he's making great decisions, making good throws, and just moving his team down the field.
Yep, just consistency, right? That's
Yeah.
when I think of Tom Brady, that's what I think of is consistency. Everything's always the same. And we saw little signs of this, little signs of it. We could never know what was going to come from him, but the little signs of it in this game for sure. Michigan gets, the next possession for Michigan to end the quarter. They get the ball back. And I thought it was interesting. They started to run the ball more. Obviously, now all the focus, as it should be, is on David Terrell and those receivers. Michigan starts to run the ball more and eventually runs it in for a touchdown. And as we head into the fourth quarter, it's 28-28. And this is one of those games that we do where it was a good game in terms of being close, and it's a very well-played game to this point for both sides.
Yeah, it was a fun game to watch. I mean, I remember that about the game, watching it back in 2000. This is a high-level game. Really exciting. Both teams, playmakers going back and forth. And again, let me go back to that David Terrell touchdown. I got to point out, Milo Lewis again misses takes a poor angle on a tackle, misses it completely, and it was David Terrell gone. But you mentioned it. These two drives now in a row by Michigan. One was 9 plays, the other was 10 plays, and neither took that long, but they are very methodical, long drives in terms of yardage. And now the game's tied up 28-28 going into the fourth quarter. And this fourth quarter is very interesting too, Mike. And early on, Alabama looks like this thing's getting out of hand, and they're about to relinquish the lead, which they've had the entire game. They've not trailed Michigan at all. Michigan is down to the goal line, and big mistake. They fumble on the goal line, and Alabama recovers, and that was really the opportunity there for Michigan to take the lead and kind of put them away, but Bama answered. And there wasn't a whole lot in this drive, but Alabama got the ball back. Another huge drive in retrospect that I don't really think about in this game. Bama gets the ball back with 6 minutes left. It's still tied up. Again, that all the scoring in the third quarter. Fourth quarter has been quiet. But they get the ball back at their own 35. Drive gets to midfield. Watts has a huge third down run. And again, I mentioned Watts' legs. He was able to kind of do this quite a bit. But gets a huge third down run that gets him across midfield, probably around the 40-yard line. They get called for a holding, I think, on Shaun Alexander. And I think they mentioned it was the 17th penalty of the game. Did I hear that right?
I think you did hear it right.
God.
And for a game that I thought largely was very well played, these penalties I didn't really think were that big of an issue. But this particular play was a huge play in the game. Both these teams in this fourth quarter had a chance, had chances to win it and had chances to go ahead and couldn't take advantage.
They couldn't, but it was Alabama finished with 18 penalties in the game. So it's kind of that's maybe Mike DuBose summed up in a nutshell, like some good players, but just not the best coach team. And that's where they were.
What was the saying he used to have?
It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity or something to that effect.
There you go.
Yeah, so maybe working on penalties next time is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. But after that third down hold, they got sacked on the next play too. So all of a sudden, you go from having the ball at Michigan 40, first down, to punting from your own 20, and it gives Brady this opportunity now to take over almost close to midfield, and he does what you expect from Tom Brady, right down the field, gets him down to the 20-yard line, sets up a field goal with 2 seconds left to win it. And you're probably thinking, you probably didn't remember how this game played out, but you're probably thinking, there's Tom Brady. That's what I expected.
Yeah, I had chills going up my spine. You're watching Tom Brady in a 2-minute drill be a master. We've seen it for 20 years since, and he drives him right down the field with 2 minutes left, gets him in perfect situation, basically hands the ball to the kicker and says, here you go, nice little chip shot. Let's get out of here and win the Orange Bowl.
Yep, pretty much. And that was not the case, though. A block kick by Alabama, and it's relief for Alabama, and a chance now in overtime to get back in this thing and win it. But a great game up to this point, and you're thinking, okay, the kicking issues for Michigan, it's usually what you'd see for Alabama, but just wait a second, okay? We go to overtime. Michigan first play, touchdown. Again, it seemed like the touchdown passes they had just seemed so easy, Mike.
Yeah, it really did. And you got to remember, this game was unique in that no scoring in the first or fourth quarter, right? All the scoring in the second and third quarter, and then we come out in overtime, and this is literally the first play from Brady, touchdown to the tight end, 25 yards, very easy pitch and catch, as they say. Very
easy pitch and catch, and Alabama has to respond as well, and they do. I mean, Alabama, a nice 21-yard pass to Antonio Carter from Andrew Zal, And I think, like, remembering it, like, you're still celebrating, like, wow, what a game. They answered. Now they go back and get a chance here to score first in overtime or double overtime and put the pressure back on Michigan. But before you can even, like, finish that thought, Ryan Flugner misses the extra point, and Alabama loses 35-34. Oh.
This is the second game we've done in a row, Ben, where the ending takes you by surprise, even though you kind of know what's coming. So we did the game last week with Sir Parker on that long third down where he broke it for the touchdown. And you're like, wow, this is still surprising. And even the way this game ended, even though you kind of know how it's going to end, you're thinking like, all right, we're going to go to another overtime. And this guy misses the extra point. And I'm just thinking in my head, like, this is why Ben distrusts kickers. Like, it's all, what was his name? Ryan Flugner?
Oh, yeah.
Ryan Flugner. It all starts somewhere, and it started here for you.
I'm pretty sure that a buddy of mine got like the shoe polish and wrote on the back of his car, Flugner sucks, and drove around with that like on his car for a week or two. Like that's how bad it was. And like this wasn't a surprise. I mean, Flugner was inconsistent, to put it nicely, throughout the season. Alabama overcame that in many respects. And because of that, you kind of just overlooked it. But again, it's like the last straw, like a chance to win a BCS game, an Orange Bowl, and here we are with this mixed extra point. And I went back to the stats. He missed 4 extra points that year, Mike. So it wasn't like this was a one-time occurrence. It was consistently a poor kicker, and it came back to the bottom again. But yeah, this maybe I don't remember the early 90s, mid 90s being as bad, but I think from like this point forward, up until this year, the 2020 season has been really an anomaly for Alabama. They have a kicker that's a finalist for the Lou Groza, so that's remarkable in itself. But that has been the one weakness of Nick Saban's teams. But it goes back even further than that. It's just been an Alabama thing, it seems like.
It's been a thing ever since I've known you, for sure. Every time a kicker trots out and I'm around you, I got to hear about the whole history of Alabama kickers.
Oh,
and thankfully, they've had good enough teams here the past 10, 12 years where, it doesn't come down to the kicker that much.
Right. And a shout out to Flugner. He's actually a doctor now. I didn't realize that, but he's a orthopedic surgeon. So he has gone on.
He bounced back.
He did bounce back okay. So no worries there. But yeah, I mean, at the time, that was about as frustrating as it gets, and Alabama loses in the Orange Bowl. And I guess it was kind of a tale of two directions for these programs at that time, Mike. Michigan was still kind of at their height. You mentioned a couple years removed from national championship. Lloyd Carr's cruising. On the other side of the conference, you have Ohio State who's struggling, trying to find their legs again. And Lloyd Carr, I mean, every year seemed like he was playing either in a BCS bowl, like the Rose Bowl, or playing at a high-level New Year's Day bowl.
Yeah, Michigan's humming at this point. I mean, absolutely humming. They're riding the coattails of that national championship. All the guys that we mentioned, put Brady to the side. Steve Hutchinson, David Terrell, Dhani Jones, Ian Gold, Cato June, Anthony Thomas. These are all guys that are household names if you're a college football fan. If you followed it back then, you know these guys. And, I liken it to maybe an Ohio State these days, where every Ohio State team, 6 or 7 guys from the team, and a lot of them end up going to play in the pros. Well, that was Michigan back then. And, Lloyd Carr had them rolling.
Well, Alabama the next year, as I mentioned, that 2000 season with so much promise and so much hope to go out as the third-ranked preseason number 3 team in the country. They would lose 35-24 to UCLA. Would go on to lose 8 games that year, Mike. 8 games, 3-8 that year. And it was a pretty brutal season. It was enough with everything else going on that Mike DuBose would eventually resign and start the coaching carousel that would be followed by Dennis Franchione for a little over a year or so. And then Mike Price for a cup of coffee in the offseason. And then eventually Mike Shula in 2003 took over, and he coached for 4 years before Joe Kynes was an interim head coach for a game, and then Nick Saban in 2007. So quite a 7-year stretch after this game.
Yeah, wow. You just mapped it out there. What an odyssey to get to Nick Saban from here, especially from here, like you said, you kind of thinking as an Alabama fan, wow, hey, going into next year, we have some continuity. We have some good players. Maybe we can make something happen. They lose the first game to UCLA. It seemed like it was all downhill from there.
I mean, the 90s Alabama was really good. I mean, really good. They won the national championship one year, but they were 12-1 in both 93 and 94. They won 10 games in 96. When DuBose took over, I mean, this team was really, really good. And DuBose really collapsed quickly. He won 4 games his first year, 7 his second year before this year, and then a 3-8 afterwards. And that was all she wrote for Mike DuBose. But a pretty rough season. Any what-ifs in this game for you, Mike?
No real what-ifs. I mean, I thought other than the penalties, I thought this game was pretty straightforward. I don't have any big what-ifs. Do you?
No, I mean, what if Chris Samuels had been playing? You know, I don't know that it makes a huge difference, but I think maybe Alabama was able to move the ball a little bit more, maybe score that one extra touchdown or field goal to win this game in regulation because, as I mentioned, he was the top lineman in the country that year and was missing the game because of an injury. So that was their big miss, and just a couple of the plays there. I mean, what if they don't have a couple of those holding calls that win against them? What if Alabama has 10 penalties instead of 18? What happens at that point? But otherwise, I mean, just a really good game. Would have loved to see it gone in double overtime and continue playing it out, but didn't happen that way. Outdated, I don't remember a whole lot outdated because we watched this game on the link we'll have on the website, distantreplaypodcast.com. We don't have the actual feed as it originated. We have it being aired on Classic as one of their bowl reruns and bowl days where they would just have a marathon of classic bowl games. We see this one which I also thought was great because the guy that put it on YouTube was fast forwarding through the commercials on his TiVo, and you get to see him do it. He had some pretty good skill because he always came back right on time. Yeah, that guy was on point. He was perfect. He would come back right at the commercial right before he came back to the game and lead you back into it perfect. It's like when he was doing it, he knew he was going to upload it to YouTube one day. He did. So we didn't get to see a lot outdated in terms of commercials and stuff. And yeah, I mean, there wasn't a whole lot. I don't think that you could pull. I got one thing, Ben. Okay. So it's a little preview to what our mini-sode is going to be this week. The outdated thing I saw was the old school bowl schedule on the bottom scroll sort of playing out here on New Year's Day. And that gives you a little bit of a preview to what our mini-sode is going to be this week about how me and Ben are big fans of the old bowl schedule. So that was outdated, but in a good way. Absolutely. So some really good games. Just an overall pretty cool going back and watching Tom Brady. I don't think many people think about this game with him. I don't necessarily. I do now, seeing what he's accomplished. But an all-around great Alabama team, just in a good win, very good win for Michigan to win 10 games, finish the year out at number 5. And by the way, the national championship that year, Florida State and Virginia Tech, the classic national championship that I think we'll probably go back and watch at some point, Mike, for the show. Yeah, that was Michael Vick's coming out party against the Peter Warwick, Chris Wanke Florida State team. Ended up not being a very close game, but I think a very important game, and a game a lot of people remember because of Michael Vick. You also had Nebraska, Tennessee, and Kansas State all in the top 6 of the BCS. So that's maybe that should have been my outdated right there. But a great season and a great game going back to watch. And I'm surprised we didn't have any Y2K mentions during the game. There was not one mention. I had to go back and look and say, was this January 1st, 2001, but they're calling it the 2000 Orange Bowl? One of those things I always get confused by. But I looked and I'm like, no, this was Y2K. Y2K was this day. And, for those of you who don't remember or don't want to remember what that was like when people thought the world was going to end, once the year 2000 came, that was a legit thing that people thought was going to happen. And needless to say, it did not. We survived. All right, let's close it out on that note. We thank you for listening to the Distant Replay Podcast. Find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com. Connect on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. All the shows are archived there. Please hit subscribe, rate, and review. Share the show with somebody that you know that wants to relive this classic Orange Bowl. We would appreciate that. And we'll look forward to talking to you again on the next episode. Until next time.